What is shadow work? The shadow work meaning is as follows: working with your unconscious mind to uncover the parts of yourself that you repress and hide from yourself. This can include trauma or parts of your personality that you subconsciously consider undesirable. Anyone can do shadow work on their own. Now, that's just a little paragraph from Maggie Wold that I thought perfectly encapsulated what my presentation today will be about. But before I get to my presentation, I would just like to thank everyone for being here today. And I would really like to thank the creators of Funnel for asking me to come here and do my presentation at Funnel 2, Convergence. My presentation is called Shadow Work, Breaking the Chains of Trauma, and will be presented by myself, Crypt Rick. Who is Crypt Rick? Well, I figured before I got started into this presentation, I would tell you a little bit about myself, and in some of these points that I'll be making, there's a lot of shadow work I had to do on myself to accomplish. One thing is I'm a huge music fan. Always had music in my life, and I continue to always be looking for new music to listen to. It's always playing in the background. And I can tell you, it was kind of lucky that I used to live by a bar and got a job there. And what's kind of funny is I always had this really big fear of speaking in front of people. And I figured, what a great way to confront that shadow than to get a job DJing where I would have to address this and actually talk in front of people. And that is exactly what I did. I went and got myself a job there. I started teaching myself how to DJ, and it wasn't too long before I was the head DJ there and really confronted that shadow head on. Another thing about me is I've always been hungry for knowledge, hungry for truth. You will always see me either watching a documentary, listening to a podcast, watching a presentation. I'm always trying to take in knowledge. I'm very interested in our ancient history. I'm interested in philosophy. I'm really interested in why people act the way they do, why they think the way they do. And that is for myself as well. Why do I do the things I do? Why do I act the way I do? So I'm always really excited to take in new knowledge and try to find truth. Now, around the time of 16 years old is when I got sick and started getting diagnosed by doctors. Now, it took them about a year to finally figure out what was wrong with me, in which I finally found out that I have a condition called ankylosing spondylitis. This is a huge trauma for me and requires a lot of shadow work, even to this day. This is something I deal with on a daily basis. And there's a lot of shadow work that goes involved in this, and I will continue to do it because it's a trauma that is not going away. It never will. So it's always going to be there. And it's always trying to slow me up. It's trying to make me think negative about myself. So I'm always constantly pushing back against this and working through that shadow. I can also say that I've been happily married to an incredible woman for the last 25 years. I can thank her to the end of time because she has been there, been my rock for those 25 years, there to pick me up when I fall and there to push me forward and encourage me. It's kind of really cool because we're growing together on this journey. So I've been very blessed to have a woman that is so supportive and who has been with me for so many years. Also, I'm an artist, tattoo artist actually. Always loved art, always been drawing, painting, doing many different forms of art. Tattoos have also been something that I've loved since I can remember. Since I saw the first one on my uncle when I was very young, I just knew that that was something I wanted to do. It was also a big shadow in my life because everybody I told I wanted to start doing this, they kind of told me I couldn't do it. I was too old. Heard a lot of people give me excuses. And that was a big shadow I had to work through. I pushed forward and I did teach myself. And now it's what I do all the time. I love tattooing. I love the art form. Last but not least, I just started doing a video podcast show a year ago. I do it on YouTube and Rumble, and I also do a show 2 days a week on Revolution Radio. Over the last year, I've met so many incredible people, and we have dived into these topics that I feel are most important: natural law, objective morality, freedom, conscious parenting. Incredible interviews I've had with so many amazing people, and I look forward to doing more. Now, let's start right here. What is the shadow? What do I mean when I say shadow work? Well, for me, and I think that's the best example I can give, is kind of incorporate what I've been through into my presentation because it happened to me and it's stuff I'm working on, so I know it best. For me, the shadows were the things that I was pushing deep down that I didn't really want to deal with. And we all have these shadows that we don't deal with or we don't even really realize that are there, but they're just those, exactly what it says, a shadow. Just things that are really deep down inside you that you do your best to ignore, you try to not dive into, you don't really want to look at, and they're just kind of these things that you try to keep off your radar because they're the shadow. They're things that you don't really want to look at. They make you uncomfortable, and a lot of people don't look forward to doing that and diving into themselves. So that's what I mean by the shadow. What is trauma? What do I mean by that term? My presentation is called Shadow Work: Breaking the Chains of Trauma. Well, trauma is so many different things, and it's kind of different for every person, is it not? So, when I talk about trauma, it's kind of like what I said in the last slide. It's these dark shadows that are deep down, and they can be big traumas or they can be little traumas. I've heard that term. I love using that because we all have these traumas. Just think about it. You have people, traumas can be big, where it's maybe happening in the home, and you can think of traumas in so many different ways. There's physical trauma, there's mental trauma, emotional trauma. These are just these traumas that kind of get pushed down, and over time we just kind of ignore and don't deal with. And that's what I mean. Depression, another trauma. And these are just kind of the things the dark things deep down that we don't really like to look at, part of ourselves. So that's what I mean by trauma. And there's so many different traumas, big and small, and they're going to be different for every person. But what I can tell you 100% is that we all have traumas. They're all in us, and we're either searching them out and acknowledging them, bringing them out of the shadow into the light and confronting and dealing with them, or we're not. It's that simple. So I think it's so important that people realize that we all have traumas, big ones and small ones. And it's up to us to start looking into ourselves, digging these shadows out and acknowledging them. Now, how important is it to do one's own shadow work? This, to me, is the foundation. This is where metal meets bone. I think this is so important that one starts to do their own shadow work, because how are you ever going to find out who you truly are and what your traumas are if you're not actually diving in deep and drilling into yourself to expose them and deal with them? So for me, that's the foundation. It's so important that one starts to do their own shadow work because, as I said, we all have traumas and we're either dealing with them or we're not. So for me, I think that, it's so important for one to start doing their own shadow work. And I really think that is, as I just said, the foundation that one needs when they start on this journey to rediscovering who they are, who they truly are, their true self. And it's just so important and something that a lot of people are very uncomfortable doing or, at times have really no interest in doing. So I think it's just one of the most important steps that one can take is to even begin on the journey of diving into yourself and looking for these traumas, looking for, and in the process, discovering who you really are. Now, we all have past traumas in our lives that we have not identified, acknowledged, or healed. As I said in an earlier slide, traumas can be big or small, all consuming or underlying. As I was saying earlier, we all have them and they're there. And you're either dealing with them, you're exposing them, or you're not. And you just keep on pushing them down, and not dealing with them. So, I mean, I just think it's so important to let people realize that we all have them. And these shadows are in all of us, these traumas. And I just think that once you start diving into yourself, that you're going to start really seeing, some of the big ones and the small ones. And it's so important at this point that you have to start dealing with them because, I mean, how many people go through their life and, never even acknowledge some of these things? They just bury it so far deep down that they don't even acknowledge it. They ignore it. And a lot of times they're not even identified. For me, in a lot of the cases, I didn't even realize they were kind of there until I started really diving into myself and looking really deep, kind of digging my way through those shadows and kind of poking around and seeing what was there, because they were definitely there. Didn't even realize they were there. But once you start really, really taking the time to dive into yourself, you're going to start identifying them. And you'll be shocked at some of the things that you find that you really didn't realize were there, kind of playing in the background all the time, like on auto repeat kind of deal. So I just think that it's so important that we have to start identifying these shadows that we have, these traumas, and acknowledging them. And then in turn, once you do that, you can start healing them. And I just think that is so important and a major step when you're doing the shadow work. Now, how does not confronting and healing our traumas affect our lives? And that's a really important question. If you're not dealing with these traumas, whether big or small, and they're in you and you're not acknowledging them, you're not identifying them, you're not taking the time to do this process, how does this affect your life? And it can affect it in so many different ways. I think of people, a lot of the times I look at people, they're kind of like tumbleweeds. That's the best way I can do it. And I think we all know people that are like that. They kind of just bounce from one thing to the next, whether it be in, a political party. You'll meet somebody and they're for one party 1 minute, and then you talk to them down the road and they're for another party, and they're kind of flip-flopping back and forth and not really, they're just kind of bouncing back and forth, not really sticking with one or the other. I also think of it for people, they get very easily caught up in the lies that are told about a lot of these things, about politics, about our history, about our culture, and all of these things. They kind of, if they don't have that foundation and they're not doing this work on themselves, they just can really easily fall for a lot of the scams and the lies and get caught up in those situations if they're not doing this work on themselves and finding out who their true self is. And that's why I kind of said they're like tumbleweed, kind of blowing around. And I know people in my life that way. They're always kind of just drifting around. They're not, have no real anchor. They're just kind of bouncing from one thing to the next. And I know a lot of people that haven't done this shadow work become very, very selfish. And I know a lot of people in my life, and I've met a lot of people, and you see a lot of people that it's all about them. It's just me, 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 me. That's all they think about from the time they get up till the time they go to bed. It's what can they get, what's in it for them, and they just turn very selfish. And I think that's from not doing the shadow work on yourself and getting to know who you truly are. So you're just kind of, like I said, drifting from one thing to the next quick fix. A lot of people are doing that. They're looking at all these new age religions. They're trying to find the quick fix. They don't, because that's the way the society is now, right? Instant gratification. They want it quick. They want it fast and with the least amount of work. And it's not called shadow work for no reason, because it is work. And a lot of people don't want to take that time. So they just kind of drift around one thing to the next, one quick fix to the next. And in turn, what are they? They're just lost. And that's why I love the thinking of the tumbleweed. They're just kind of blowing around, lost, not really knowing who they are, what they truly stand for, what they truly believe, and they're just kind of in that state. And I just see a lot of people currently in that state. And I think the way out of that, and I know the way out of that, is starting to do this work on yourself, drilling down on who you are, and rediscovering who the true you is, and finding these little traumas or big traumas, as I said, and exposing them and dealing with them. Now, how does shadow work affect how we think about ourselves, others, and our worldviews? Well, for me, doing the shadow work, it gave me that anchor, as I was saying. It was giving me that foundation. And it really affected how I looked at things in the world, and especially how I looked at myself and my views on things. So I think of people that haven't done the shadow work, as I was saying. Remember, I was saying they were lost. And I just think that when you start doing the shadow work on yourself, it really changes how you do think about yourself, for one. Because slowly, if you're being honest and you're working through it and you're doing it and being brutally honest with yourself, it will very much start to affect how you think about yourself as you try to slowly figure out the true you and who you truly are. And then it'll, in that same sense, it'll start really affecting how you look at others. I find myself now, when I'm talking to people or meeting people, I'm really, really aware of the conversation that we're having. And even after the conversation, I find myself really analyzing what I was said, how I said it to them, what we talked about, and it just makes me really aware of others now and how I interact with them and the things that I say. And it also affects how I look at the world now, because when you start doing the work on yourself and you get that, you get that foundation, and you really start to find the true you, and then you start looking and taking that and into the world, and then you start seeing how other people are, it really does affect how you see people in the world. Now, not dealing with our trauma can lead people down a destructive path. If you're not dealing with these traumas, whether big or small, it's going to have a destructive outcome eventually. These shadows and traumas are eventually going to rear their head at some point. That is, I can guarantee. If you have no anchor, and I keep saying that because I think anchor and foundation are a great way to phrase it. And I think a lot of the people I meet in person, especially, I notice that they don't really have any anchor. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they really truly believe. And so I think that's very destructive. If you don't know who you are and have that true anchor, you can very easily be misguided or lied to, or chasing, as I said earlier, these quick fixes. I think having your true anchor, your true foundation, is one of the most important things I can talk about today. And I think it's just a great place where people need to start. You have to have that foundation. Along with that, a lot of people I meet have no real identity. They're kind of, taking on these identities of other people, whether it be musicians or actors or somebody that they kind of look up to. They really don't have an identity of their own. And they just kind of, take these these other people's traits on and kind of incorporate it into themselves, not really having their own identity. And I think that comes from not doing the work on yourself and finding out who you truly are. So if you don't know who you are at the core, that is going to be very, very destructive, because, as I said, you have no true identity. A lot of people Lots of people have self-hate and loathing. So many people. And I've heard people say that they don't like who they are, that they don't like what they've become, that they don't like the actions that they do. There's so many different things I've heard people say, but I think that a lot of people are dealing with this self-hate and loathing, where they just are not happy with who they are. And I think a lot of that comes from, and in fact, I know it comes from not doing this work that is so important. They're not taking the time to really get and know themselves, drill down on what's going on with their lives, and dealing with it. And I just think when you're not doing that, it's going to lead to this self-hate and this loathing. For me, another one, this is definitely personal, not doing the work at one time, not knowing who I was, not really having, I should say, forgetting my true identity, because I lost my identity over a, amount of years. I kind of lost touch with who I really was, and there was a lot of reasons for that. Uh, I can't really talk about a lot because, like I said, it's only a presentation and it's kind of on the shadow work, but it definitely incorporates into this presentation because when I didn't do the shadow work and I was kind of just reacting to situations that were happening to me, I didn't know how to deal with them. And for me, it definitely led to becoming addicted to alcohol. That was a major trauma. I would consider that a major trauma in my life. Now, it did come, the alcohol addiction did come from when I was 16 years old. I did started getting chronic pain in my spine, and it took the doctors a good year to really, they basically tested me to death to find out what was the condition which I had, which was ankylosing spondylitis. And that was something that been a major trauma in my life and something that I continuously have to work at. That is a shadow that is always there. And I know it's there. I'm well aware of it, and I do confront it and deal with it on a daily basis. But at the time when I was uh, finding out about this disease at such a young age, because I think at 16, 17 years old, you really don't have a grasp, most people, on who they are, their true self. And then not knowing myself definitely led me down to the path of drinking. That was kind of how I dealt with it at that time. Was I didn't wasn't spiritually mature enough, wasn't mature enough in any sense of the word, really, to take in the knowledge that these doctors were giving me and the diagnosis and what was going to happen over the years. So what did I do? I pushed it down. That's what I did. I took that shadow, I took that trauma, and I pushed it down, and I just drank got involved in drinking heavy every day for many years, which was a lot easier at the time for me, I thought, than dealing with that trauma. So becoming addicted to substances is another thing that is very dangerous if you're not dealing with your traumas and dealing with your shadows. Now, what holds back someone from ever starting to do the shadow work on themselves? That is such an important question, I think. What holds back someone from ever starting to do the shadow work on themselves? Well, one is denial. How many people out there don't think they have anything wrong with them? They are fine the way they are. Everyone else is the problem, but they're good. Nothing going on with them. Everything's working. Everyone else is the problem. That's exactly what they think. So they're in this state of denial that they even need to do the shadow work, that they even need to take time to sit down and get to know themselves. Excuses. Boy, let me tell you, do people have excuses, and I've heard them all. I hear them all the time, and I'm sure you have too. Think about all the excuses people make not to do the shadow work. They're too busy, they got a job, they have children. These excuses are endless. And let me tell you something, to make it personal on this part, excuses was a big shadow for me and a little trauma, maybe a big one, just doing this presentation. Let me tell you, when I agreed to do this presentation, it wasn't long until all of these little shadows and traumas started to rear their heads, and they were fierce. Now, I know from doing the shadow work, I've acknowledged them, and I know I've identified them. I know these things, these traumas that were rearing their head. I'm well aware of them, but that does not mean the fact that they did not try to really take over and give me all the excuses I needed not to do this presentation. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. Why do I think I'm even worthy of doing a presentation? Like, all of these excuses came forward. It was crazy, actually, how quickly they reared their head and started really attacking and going at me. And these are shadows that I'm aware of. So it was really surprising to me, actually, during this creation of this presentation, how quickly they came out of their shadows, for sure. And I did not let them, as you can see, win. I just got more stubborn, and I just said, no, I am going to do this. I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to do this. And I am worthy, and I am smart enough. I just kept telling myself that. So it's just really kind of neat how doing a presentation on shadow work and breaking the chains of trauma, and I definitely, during this whole process, had these shadows coming forward and hard at me. So, yes, I mean, a lot of people say that once you acknowledge them and they're there and you kind of deal with them, that they go away. They're always there. At least for me, they're always there. But I definitely do not let them control who I am. I use that, in my case, I use it for fuel and to get angry and kind of power through them, because I do never want these shadows controlling me or what I want to do. Now, a lot of people are just lazy. How many people do we know that are just lazy? They don't want to do it. They have no interest in doing it. And they just want to kind of sit around, coast, not really look into new information, don't want to really look into themselves. They're kind of, happy with the way they are, even if they're not kind of even happy with where their life is or what their current situation is. They're just too lazy to do anything about it. Kind of goes hand in hand with the denial and the excuses. Now, cowardice is another big one. I mean, you have to be brave to start really diving into who you are and into your shadows and traumas. I think anyone that can do that and be brutally honest with themselves and really drill in on themselves and do this work are not cowards in any shape of the word. It takes courage to do the shadow work and to be brutally honest with yourself. So a lot of people are just cowards. They don't even have the courage to start the work. Ignorance is another one. I mean, think of that. A lot of people don't even know what shadow work is. They have no interest in it. They don't think they have a problem. They think everything, how many times these people point their finger outwardly and blame it, as I was saying earlier, on everyone else, everything else, but never really taking that finger and pointing it back where it belongs, which is squarely on themselves. A lot of people don't want to do that. They fear that more probably than anything. I think a lot of people do not want to take the time, and they are scared to death to start looking into who they truly are. If they're being honest, I got to keep saying that, because if you're going to do the shadow work on yourself and you're not going to be honest and you're just going to blow smoke up your own ass, there's no point in doing this. That was the one thing that I learned very quickly. You have to be brutally honest with yourself. And a lot of people are cowards and do not want to do that. The biggest one for me, I think, is fear. And it goes kind of hand in hand with what I was just saying. How many people are scared to death to really drill in on themselves, acknowledge these shadows and these traumas, confront them head on, and deal with them? People fear that, I think, more than anything. And I have heard that A lot of people fear that even more than doing public speaking or a lot of other things. This is really surprising how, and in a way it's not, but for me it's kind of surprising how much people fear really getting and drilling in on themselves to find out who they truly are and dealing with these traumas, whether they're big or small. I think fear is probably the major one that people are stuck in, is this state of fear. And that I take across the board. Fear what's going on in the world, fear what's going on with themselves, fear. And it's definitely by design, I'd say. They social engineers of the world keep people in this state of fear on purpose, because when you're in this state of fear, you can't really get any clear thinking done. You're kind of stuck in this fight or flight mode, and so real no conscious thinking is going on or learning. But definitely you're not taking the time to look into yourself. That's for sure. If you're in this state of fear, and if you fear even doing this work, it's shadow work. It's hard work. And that's why I love the picture for this slide. Rolling that rock up the hill. And I tell you, a lot of times I'd be rolling that rock up the hill and it would come rolling right back down over me. And I would get up and I would brush myself off and I would get behind that rock and I would start pushing it up the hill again, which I'm still doing to this day. Still. I will keep doing the work on myself because I know, as I said earlier, that is the most important thing I think that people can do, is get that foundation. If you don't have that, there is no way that you're going to be able to go out there and do the great work or even take in the knowledge to do the great work if you don't have that foundation that doing the shadow work on yourself is going to give you. How does someone get started in doing shadow work? A lot of people I talk to, I try to talk to people in person, and definitely in person as much as I can. That is just something I much prefer, is the one-on-one interaction or even in a group, but being in person. But with the way the world is now and with technology, that's getting, a little more difficult to do. So you can definitely do it through interviewing like I do, or connecting through social media. There's ways to do it. But I do have a lot of people, when I talk to them, ask me, well, how do you get started in doing the shadow work? And it's kind of really self-explanatory when you think about it. You just have to take the time to do it and first acknowledge that the work needs to be done. I mean, if you don't think there's anything wrong with you, and you think everyone else and everything in the world is the problem, well, then you're not really even going to get started on it. But that's what the key is, to first acknowledge that there's some work that needs to be done on yourself, and then taking the time to do the work on yourself every day. Taking that little bit of time to just quiet yourself, sit with yourself, be honest with yourself, and really start asking the hard questions and dealing with these little traumas and big traumas that have accumulated over your life. I just always give people the same answer. How do you get started? You just settle yourself and make the time. Just set aside a lot of time that you're going to sit with yourself, and just that's the key. And that's the best answer that I could give anybody that asks me, how do you get started in doing the shadow work? How important is doing one shadow work in the journey to becoming free? Well, I think this is one of the most important things, as I keep saying, doing your own shadow work. And the best way I can kind of describe it is maybe painting a picture for you. Think of yourself as a young tree, a sapling. As you begin to do your shadow work, you're establishing a strong root base. As you continue to identify and deal with your shadows, you are growing stronger. As you continue to grow, taking in correct knowledge, you will then begin to branch out and become the person you want to be, trauma-free, which in turn will make you a better family member, a better friend, better spouse, and most important, a better human being. One who has done the hard work on themselves, who has grown stronger and in truth, which will ensure that when you go out to teach the great work when the people who have never done this work come at you, and they will not be able to bend you and certainly not break you, because you can stand strong and tall in truth and knowing who you truly are. Shadow work is one's first step, the foundation one needs to finally becoming awake and able to absorb correct knowledge. Shadow work is hard, uncomfortable work that takes time. I said it earlier, it takes time. And it's definitely not called shadow work just by coincidence or because it sounds cool or anything like that. It's shadow work because it's work. And at times it's going to be hard, extremely hard, especially if you're being brutally honest with yourself. For me, there was times that this work was so hard and uncomfortable when I did it. When I started really digging down and asking those hard questions of myself and bringing these traumas forward and dealing with them, it was hard at times. And the feelings that I would get were so uncomfortable that it was a really, at times, difficult process. So I always tell people when we talk about shadow work that, it's called work for a reason. And it's going to have some moments where it's extremely hard and uncomfortable, and that it is going to take time. This is something that you have to set aside and do every day, at least in my case. I try to set aside a little bit of time every day just to sit quiet with myself with no distractions. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do the shadow work. Different ways one can do their shadow work are facing oneself in a mirror. This one was one that I did for the longest time. I would sit quiet, no distractions. So that means no cell phone, no tablet, no music in the background, no TV, nothing like that. No friends around. Just sitting in a room, quiet, facing myself in a mirror. And I tell you, it is one of the hardest things that I ever did. It really was difficult at first to sit there and just stare at myself and confront myself. And I can see why a lot of people don't want to do that, because I tell you, when you're just sitting there and confronting yourself and your shadows, it is very, very unnerving at times, and it's not an easy thing to do. So, I mean, I had to kind of gradually work my way up over time to get longer and longer time sitting in the mirror facing myself. At first, it would kind of be like 5 or 10 minutes, and then, I would work on that, and then eventually I could do it longer and longer. But it was definitely very uncomfortable at first just to even do that, just to sit down quiet, which is strange to a lot of people. Just sitting quiet with themselves is very foreign to a lot of people. There's so many distractions out there now with social media and with TV and radio and music and family, jobs. You think about all these distractions. Just the fact that you can sit quiet by yourself is really a strange thing to most people when I talk to them when they start doing this work. And it is definitely makes them uncomfortable. So, and I tell people it's tough at first, and some people will even say, "Oh, it can't be that bad." You're sitting in a mirror looking at yourself in a quiet room, and I just tell people, if you don't think it's hard, try it sometime, and then let me know how it goes. And most people that I talk to after they do it, they really, if they're being honest with me, said it was a really uncomfortable feeling at first, but it gets better the more that you do it. It really does. And now I can sit quiet with myself for a long periods of time. And I actually look forward to those parts of my day where I can actually just spend time with myself and examining things that have happened throughout the day, people I've talked to, things that I'm still dealing with, like when it comes to my disability. I do look forward to that time. Now, if you don't have to sit in front of a mirror, that is one way, but a lot of people I talk to say they enjoy sitting in nature. that they'll like to go to a park, or they'll like to go sit by the water, or go sit on a beach, or just go sit in their yard and just sit out in nature. Great. I think that's a great way to do it. If you're very, if you don't want to sit and stare at yourself in a mirror, another great way is to go out and just sit quiet in nature. That's the way that I mostly do things now. I really enjoy that quiet time sitting out in my yard, in my garden, surrounded by nature, and just doing my shadow work there. Very, very peaceful. It's very calming, and it just really sets me in that mood to even do the work. So that's the way I prefer to do it these days, and the way that I continue to do it every day. Now, I have talked to people that really enjoy doing their shadow work either hiking or biking, which was one I never really thought of, because I was always under the impression that you would kind of have to kind of sit in a quiet place and be very still, almost in, like a meditation state, and kind of do your shadow work that way. But I've spoke to many people who do their greatest thinking and work on themselves while they're just hiking by themselves or taking a bike ride, and that seems to be what gets them into the mood to do the work on themselves. It lets them kind of just forget about everything else and just really focus on themselves. I think that's great. Anything that allows you to get into that state, to be willing to start looking into yourself and working on yourself, is a great thing. So hey, if hiking and biking works for you, I say all the power to you. Another one for me, besides sitting in nature, one that I picked up over the last couple of years, is gardening. Gardening is something that I'm really enjoying. I'm not very good at it, if I'm being honest. Learning as I go. Like, it seems like everything else in my life, and even when it comes to computers and technology, I'm kind of learning things over the last year as I go and as I need to know things. So it doesn't surprise me that I'm kind of that way with gardening. And I started doing that a couple years ago when we got our house, and I actually had gardens I could actually tend to. So I find that really relaxing and really gets me in the zone to doing the shadow work. I really enjoy getting my hands in the dirt and working with the plants, and learning about growing vegetables and how to take care of them. And it's also a great benefit because I'm learning a skill while I'm doing my shadow work. So I'm doing the shadow work, I'm working on myself. I mean, I'm really honing in on myself, but I'm also kind of working within nature and working on the garden, and I'm not, and in turn producing high quality food, which is incredible. It's kind of a great benefit of doing the shadow work in this case, where I'm learning about all the things I need to do to have a healthy garden and to keep things growing, and in turn, for my reward for that and doing the work on myself and tending to my garden, is I have an amazing crop of different vegetables, which is incredible because I'm really taking a turn now now that I've done a lot of the shadow work on myself when it comes to my traumas and things that have been pushed down for a lot of years. Now I'm really starting to focus in on health. That's another big thing I'm passionate about now, is natural law health, and really starting to take my health seriously, because I can tell you that over the years, the pharmaceutical industry has done a number on me in a lot of ways with different medications and treatments they were giving me over the years. And I just really never paid much attention to my health. I was like in the fact of like what I was consuming, like eating and drinking and stuff. I definitely was mindful, like I said, of the traumas from my disease and things that happened to me in the course of my life. I was very aware of those and dealing with them, but my health was like what I was eating and taking care of that, and drinking and putting into my body kind of fell to the wayside. And it was through doing my own shadow work that I really started to realize that and start addressing it. So I'm definitely on the road now to better health, and starting to be really hyper aware of everything that I put into my body, and learning the best ways to go about it, and about herbs and the benefit of getting real good high quality food in your body. How so beneficial it is to your body and to the clarity of your mind. It's just an amazing thing when you start eating real food. So gardening was a big one for me, and one that I'm going to continue to do over the years and hopefully get better at. Shadow work is simply being mindful of your true self in the moment and not allowing past trauma and fears to control you and your actions. There will be times in your journey when your shadows will come straight to the surface. This happens, I find, even once you have identified and dealt with these shadows. For me, they seem to make their appearance anytime I'm trying to learn something new. All the negative things I have ever heard people say to me, or even the things I have told myself, come forward. You cannot allow these shadows to control you. Acknowledge them, and then steamroll right over them. They only have power over you if you give it to them. When this happens, I use it as fuel, and in turn, they slowly begin to loosen their grip. Be mindful when this happens, because as I said, they will always be there, trying to stop you from moving forward. Doing one shadow work is not a one and done or weekend thing. It takes time, patience, and persistence with oneself. That is so true. It's not a one and done thing. A lot of people, I think, if they think they're going to sit down for half an hour, they're going to kind of look into themselves a little bit, not be too honest, but be a little honest. And then that's all they're going to need to do, and they're going to figure it all out, and they're going to fix a couple things, and they're going to be done. Or they can maybe do it on a weekend. They'll take a weekend, and they're going to go out maybe camping or something, or do something for the weekend, and they're just going to do it for a couple days, and they think that's going to give them all the answers and really let them find out who they truly are. And that is just not realistic in any sense of the word. It definitely, I have learned over the years of doing this, it takes time. It definitely takes time. You have to set aside that time to really give yourself time to work on yourself. And if you can set that time aside, every day is perfect. I mean, that may not be possible for everybody if we're being honest. Maybe some people don't have the time to do it every day, but definitely make time as much as possible. I'm in the situation where I can take a little bit of time every day to just sit quiet and do my shadow work. So I'm very fortunate in that case. And definitely patience, because there's going to be times when you get frustrated, you're going to go through a whole array of emotions when you start confronting your traumas and your shadows. And so you have to be really patient with yourself and be a little easy on yourself at times. Not always, but sometimes you got to know when to be easy on yourself, because I went through so many different emotions and feelings when I was doing a lot of my initial shadow work, which it does get better over time, I find, and which is really nice. And it's kind of a neat thing where I'm finding I'm at the point now where even though I'm not sitting quiet by myself and just sitting alone and thinking and confronting myself, now even throughout the course of my day, I kind of find myself at all times doing the shadow work on myself, which is kind of strange to say, and it's kind of hard for me to explain, but I'm hoping you guys know what I mean. But the more that you start doing this shadow work on yourself and just sitting quiet with yourself, that even it starts just to kind of morph into your everyday life and your everyday interactions with people and yourself. When you're sitting there talking to yourself, like we all do, that inner voice, and it just kind of incorporates it, and you start really becoming aware of the things that you're saying to yourself, especially. And then for me, what I'm saying to other people, I kind of find myself, as I was saying earlier, after conversations, kind of really analyzing what we talked about, how I reacted, and all of those things. And I'm now really trying to be hyper aware of what I say to myself, because I tell you, some of the things that I say to myself, and at times I'm not even really realizing that I'm saying these things to myself. And these little things that I've picked up over the years that somebody has told me or I've heard along the way, and they're kind of sitting there in the background on auto repeat. And some of the things that I would say to myself were just horrible. And I have to be very mindful of that. And I just hope other people, when they're doing this shadow work, start to become very aware of how they talk to themselves, which I think is so important, because I think people are just at times brutal on themselves, and the crap that they tell themselves and the lies they tell themselves. And it's just so important that you become aware of that and then stop it in its tracks when it does happen. I'm still working through that aspect to this day. Even as I was saying during this presentation, the things I would tell myself were just, and I don't know where they even came from. I kind of like I said, it's just things I picked up or I've heard over the years, and they just kind of stuck for whatever reason. And I know they're there. I'm well aware of them. I've dealt with them. I'm dealing with them, I should say. But they're still there. And so I think people have to be really mindful of what they say to themselves and to other people. So you have to be persistent when you do this. You can't kind of do one day, do a couple days, then forget about it for a week, and then maybe pick it up in a month, or, when I'm not so busy, I'll go back and do it then. You have to be very persistent. This is something that I try to do for myself every day. And sometimes I don't have an hour, or sometimes I only have a half an hour, but I still make the time to just sit quiet with myself, at least for an hour a day is what I do. And I know that's not possible for everybody, but whatever time you can set aside, as long as you're doing this every day and being persistent, you are going to start to see the benefits, as long as you're being honest about what you're looking at and saying to yourself and what you're examining. The key to this too, along with time, patience, persistence, is, I should have put honesty. You have to be brutally honest with yourself. As you start doing your shadow work, don't run away from it. Confront these shadows, traumas, head on and acknowledge them. Deal with them, and you will start to find the real you, your true nature that over the years has been robbed from you, trauma by trauma, to find out who the authentic you is. Doing this work, you will discover that you are capable of so many great things. Start the work first on yourself, then move forward and start changing our world for the better. It's time to break your chains. I would like to thank everybody for watching this presentation today, for the creators of Funnel for allowing me to come and do this presentation. I am truly honored. Thank you so much.